From open houses to Airbnb, how Justin turned curiosity into cash flow. In this episode of How to Buy with Leon Anzoleaga, we sit down with Justin, an everyday guy who started his real estate journey the way many of us do, by casually walking through open houses on the weekends. That curiosity turned into action, and that action has now turned into a growing short-term rental business. Justin shares the real talk on getting started, why you don't need a duplex to begin, how passion can be your compass, and why embracing small risks can lead to big rewards. If you ever felt like you needed all figured out before making your first move, this episode is your permission to slip to the start small, follow your instincts, and build something meaningful one property at a time. We hope you enjoy it. Hey, Justin, thank you so much, man, for being on the call with me and part of the podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, you are literally one of our favorite clients because your story is extremely unique and in real estate. A lot of times people are thinking about investing in real estate, thinking about perhaps diversifying their overall portfolio, but perhaps don't know where to even begin in that process, right? And so, I wanted to have you on maybe to tell a little bit about your story and how that process began with you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, thanks again for having me on. I think it started when I was in DC. Met my wife, girlfriend at the time, and kind of two inspirational moments. One, my mother went to law school in Washington D.C. in like the '70s,
Wow.
and she lived in Adams Morgan. And I looked back at the records, and the place that she lived in was sold for like $25,000 or something
Right.
crazy. And now it was like when we were in town, it was like on the market for like $2 million, and I was like,
Wow.
that's crazy. So like being able to see that, like how over time, especially in a place like Washington D.C., like and that's not that's from the point of her starting her to career to retirement. So like seeing the value of like retirement, like using real estate for retirement, was very apparent. And then secondly, my wife's father, so my father-in-law, he is in real estate. He renovates homes and then rents them out. He has a portfolio about 10 or 12, depending on the time. So watching how he did that, and really was able to stop working and just let the income and live off of that, was inspirational as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. A lot of people don't really know how powerful, generational wealth is obviously rooted in real estate. A lot of times people are nervous, A, of buying their first home, right? But then B, when you introduce, investing in real estate, that's also a very daunting task, right? And so as you look back, clearly you had great models and great people that kind of, gave you some ideas and perhaps a direction on this. But how did you begin that process? I mean, you obviously have been thinking about it, kind of, going through the motions internally in terms of perhaps doing this in the future. But how did you take your first step in terms of investing in real estate on your own, Justin?
Yeah, so I will start it with truly like our first primary residence, because that is how I started the story. Um, I knew that I'm not handy. I can't do construction, so I couldn't renovate a home and resell it, right? And I think like watching TV, like you think like that's the path, right? You buy a house, you flip it, you sell it a couple months later. And I knew that that wasn't an option for us. So I think what we realized was like if we take advantage of capital gains and do renovate a home and live in it for that first 2 year period, and then can sell tax free, and if get some appreciation in that value, then we can start building some wealth to kind of do different things. I think when you start out, it's like so hard because you want to buy a house for yourself. So you're like, okay, how do we make this work for in both ways, right? Like
Mhm.
to launch our investment, because I think that was a big part of it. It was like a lot of people, try to balance like, well, do we invest? Do we buy a primary residence? Because that's sometimes not the greatest investment to just buy a home for yourself.
Mm.
So that was kind of the approach we took, was do a fixer upper for ourselves in a place that we thought would grow quickly in appreciation, and a place that we didn't necessarily want to be long term, but would live there long enough to hit that 2 year capital gains, and then sell, and then really start to make moves with that capital.
That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is like you don't necessarily need to take down the multifamily properties with like, 4, 5, 10 units, but you can start with your own home. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you invest in a property that you're going to be living in, obviously follow the guidelines that, that are outlined by the agencies around that. And then eventually take the proceeds of that property and go and invest in another place, or perhaps rent that property out and then go to the next place. It's interesting to know because I think you're right. A lot of people think about the big, huge behemoth that it is to invest in real estate, but taking small steps is obviously the best steps to take. Um, Surrounding yourself with the right team is obviously important as well, right? I mean, how did you begin to find the right people around you, right? How did you find the real estate agent, the mortgage professional that you were that you decided to work with? And what was it about that interaction that convinced you that it was those people were the right parties for you to engage?
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing is like trust
Mm,
and alignment around incentives, like or alignment around like shared values. So when we were in DC and looking, I was someone who I loved going to open houses even well before we were looking at properties. I'd spend Saturday or Sunday just like creating a route on a map, like okay, these six we can walk to, and just for fun to get a sense of the market. And that was a great opportunity to meet a lot of agents,
mm,
like
mm,
when we're not in the like buy mode. And that's where I'll give a plug. Sebastian Correa, met him at an open house and could immediately tell that like his knowledge of the market, because I would start, learn about like different types of questions to ask the agents in the home about the area, about the property, and really like being able to see like what they were they like going in a hard sell mode? Were they trying to educate me?
mm,
Like who did I trust? Who did I connect with? And like that was the first step. He was the first person who was like, okay, he seems really educated on the market. He's understanding that like I'm not going to buy this home, and he's not like totally dismissive of me because of that, right? And he wants to learn more about me and my goals. And I think that's like the most important thing. And then he ultimately introduced me to you, and I think like after having the like initial conversations, it's clear like you want to get to know like what are my objectives, right?
mm.
Like not go into like how can we maximize your profits or objectives, right? Like because ultimately, whether it's on the first property, the second property, or referral, like if I get what I want out of it, right? Like selfishly, like that's going to be good for you, for him in the long run. So people who see that, and I think it's clear to see early on, like who they're working for, like if they're working for themselves or if they're working for you.
That's good. Yeah, and I think they say that people do business with people they like, know, and trust, right? And I think what I'm hearing you say is like, it's pretty easy to kind of sniff that out by asking the right questions. And if someone, I think what you said is like just trying to sell you something, they're probably not there to serve your best interest at heart. And it sounds like though you found at least two professionals that were able to do that. Now, when you align yourself with the right people, obviously there's obviously a lot of components as well that you need to account for. One of them is variables, right? Like variables of investing in real estate. Yes, purchasing your first home, there's some variables there. But when you start to build a portfolio and start to actually looking at, internal rate of return for these properties, right? When you start to look at cost of renovation for these properties, I mean, there are variables that you can't put on an Excel sheet, right? And so, can you talk about, how did you walk through these variables that you started to bump into as you obviously started to look at investing in other assets and specifically investment properties in this area?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think like when we first started out, you have like in your mind like a very specific property, like in a location that looks like this, that does this, like this, these types of numbers, this types of bedrooms, bathrooms, whatever. And like very quickly you realize like you can go on a very long journey finding that perfect product. And even when that perfect product like exists, there's a reason you like that product, right? Like it's gonna
Mm,
be competitive. So I think like working it back to like the numbers, like what is the actual outcomes you're looking to like attain? And
mm,
then applying that to any property, right? Like it doesn't have like we get so like obviously there's like an emotional part to real estate. And I think that's I'm not even gonna say to get rid of that completely because I actually think the emotional part is important. Because if you have a sense of connection for the property, I
mm,
think future buyers, and it'll have that there is value in that, right? So like it's a property that people will generally connect with, but trying to remove that, crunch the numbers, understand like, okay, rather than I want to place in this area that does these numbers today, my objectives were like the 20-year horizon, like for retirement. I want a property that in 20 years, through profits that I pull out and appreciation and tax savings, will amount to a value, right? And
Mm.
so then you have a lot of levers to play with, from like the price point of the home, the amount of profit it's going to do on a monthly basis, different like tax structure you can utilize. So each of those levers can be played differently for a different property.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is like, making sure that you have some flexibility, as cheesy as it may sound, flexibility is your best ability. But at the end of the day, like once you start to really narrow that down, have the correct strategy, to attack those, right? I mean, you mentioned this a couple of times. You said, look, in a fast-paced market where things are moving fast because there's other buyers that are out there. Yes, it's important to not just look at the bedrooms, the you know, the fixtures, et cetera, but also look at the actual numbers. How did you navigate the speed of the market? I think a lot of people are super nervous about that, especially now, right? A lack of inventory. There's more buyers out there. There are more investors, it seems like, that want to invest in flip properties. How did you navigate, that speed of the market? Because it's been apparent to me that timing, quote unquote, is one question that always comes up, right? Should I do this now? Should I be doing this now? Should I wait? Should I have done this before? How did you navigate the actual timing question and also the speed of the market?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity with both myself, with friends, to watch, especially with friends, watch them try to time the market, right?
Mm,
And so many people that I know have been like, I'm not buying now. Like it's so expensive. And a year later, it's like, well, you should have bought then. You should have. And I think like once you get to the realization that if you can make the numbers work, even if it's not like the perfect timing and the price, maybe the value does go down. Like I think real estate is not a short-term investment unless you're flipping. So that stuff doesn't really matter or bother me, right? If I can, once again, being like outcome driven, right? But not for me, the outcome is like the 20-year horizon. So
mm.
like maybe I spend, $50,000 more for a property than it's worth, and it's gonna go, down in value in the next 6 to 12 months. I don't know. I don't care. I'd rather get in now on the off chance it goes up by, $100,000 and then I'm priced out, right? But it still meets my long-term objectives.
Mm.
So I think you can never time it. Like it's once again, like what is your objective? Does it align with your long-term objective? If the answer is yes, then like the timing is now. And then two, the confidence that you have that the property will meet the objective. Like take out the market circumstances, but like those two things, you do need to be like have the confidence that like your analysis is correct.
Mm.
And once you've looked at enough properties, I think a lot of it is like looking at comps, how things are performing, and you'll develop that like confidence that what you're seeing, like what you think is, how things will play out is actually how they'll play out.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because, in a microwave society that we're in, we just want to, punch in a minute and a half and have like a gourmet meal, right? But in reality, the great things actually take time. In real estate, does take time. I mean, average appreciation in this area, right around 4.63% over the last 63 years, right? Will you make money on this particular investment? Of course, as long as you hold it longer, right? I think what you're saying is like, if you're going to be there for a month and just flip it, that's a completely different scenario, right? But if your long-term gain, if your long-term goal is to essentially hold on to this property for a while, you will make money simply because of just appreciation. But I think also doing your due diligence is key, right? You said check the numbers probably multiple times. And I think that boils down to being prepared yourself. You don't have to have all of the questions answered right away, but at least you need to have an understanding of your budget. You need to have an understanding in terms of how much money you're looking to invest, perhaps including some variables, right? So about 15% or so on some of these projects, right? Variables, because there's so many variables with the actual homes that you're investing. But lastly, I think at the end of the day, one of the things that you just outlined was like, look, it's never the right time to do this. It's only the right time when it makes sense for you, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and the property that we ended up purchasing most recently, maybe timing was good. It was the winter, rates were high, and all the factors that tend to like put some buyers on the sideline were probably advantageous to us,
Mm,
because once again, like yes, rates were high, but if I could cover my mortgage with rent, then it didn't really matter. I'll refi as long as I wasn't like on a monthly basis putting money out of my pocket. It made sense now because I can get the price for what I wanted it to, while other people were sitting on the sidelines because of the rates. And then, my profit margin will increase. I don't know when. Doesn't have to increase tomorrow because I'm not putting any additional capital out of my pocket.
that's so good. That's good. Um, a couple more questions here, and this is probably like a more so research and development for me. But you obviously interviewed a couple of different people. What was it about our interaction with our group that convinced you that we were the right party for you?
Well, first off, like knowledge of like an approach. It's very clear just from having an initial conversation that you're extremely knowledgeable. I think that you shared your wisdom with us in a way that like resonated. You asked the right questions of like, what are we trying to accomplish, right? Like, what are our object? Like I've talked a lot about how like our objectives and goals. So you mapped all of your work and the output that you gave us towards our objectives, which was super helpful, so that there was immediately that level of trust, that you were working for us and you cared about us. And then the thing that truly I love is like the pace and the speed. You said, talk about timing and those things. Like the fact that any property, in a split second, I could send you a listing that I was considering, and send work up some numbers, send out a video with a quick sentiment on that property. Obviously, that's like a critical data point that was needed to be able to act fast, right? So I felt like we could move as quickly as needed whenever the right property was available. I think a lot of times people are held down by their own circumstances, right? And you want to be in a position where you feel like everyone like that's working around you and with you is like ready to go at your speed. And I certainly felt that you're capable of going as fast as anyone that I've spoken or met with.
Oh, thank you, Justin. Thank you for that. Those are really kind words, and that's by design. I think having a bespoke process that's tied to your specific goals, right? Your specific objectives, and then obviously making sure that we provide it in a very, very timely fashion so that you can make an educated decision for yourself is critical. It's critical. Now, I know that he won't do this, so we'll do it for him. Sebastian is an incredible real estate professional, right? What was it about him that convinced you that he was the right person to partner with? You've obviously visited a bunch of open houses in the past, right? What was it about him beyond just the fact that he was interested in you and his process that convinced you that it was the right person to partner with?
Yeah, so this was many years ago, but I do remember like coming into this open house, and really just connecting on a like I was someone who would go into open houses, and a lot of the realtors like I don't want to say weren't prepared to have a conversation with me,
Mm,
but really like weren't prepared. They didn't expect like just they're expecting just like buyers to come in and ask how many bathrooms and what's the nearest elementary school, right? And like I was getting into like you know well that property on the street sold for this, and they had an updated bathroom. Why do you think this can sell for that much? And he was giving me like justification and giving me other comps and like really like riffing off of like the local market. And he was, really like telling me about the area and why he thought that this specific, neighborhood, what the growth potential there was and other neighborhoods that are comparable. So it was very like a detailed conversation. And then obviously for those like who don't know Sebastian, he's incredibly charming. So like to be able to have that like type of conversation with the charm was obviously like a natural draw. So yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, knowledge is important, but obviously wisdom, knowledge and action is the most important piece, right? And so for a guy that's been walking around these open houses, probably knows the inventory better than the majority of agents that are working these open houses. You need someone on the other side that's going to be able to provide you with the correct knowledge, so you can take obviously action with them. So that's awesome. Yeah, I would concur. He is an incredible real estate professional and obviously charming is the correct phrase to use. Well, listen, Justin, thank you so much for this. I think it will be super helpful for all of the people that are thinking about investing in real estate. Not just their first home, but obviously, potentially maybe investing in future properties in the future, like your family has done. Any parting piece of advice to the people that are probably listening to this podcast and are thinking about purchasing property or real estate in general?
Yeah, I would say like number one, like educate yourself. But I think it's what's really important is there's a lot of different ways to get into real estate.
Mm,
And it's not like a one size fits all. And I think for me, one thing we haven't touched on is that I'm actually in short-term rentals. Um,
mm.
I think it's about finding something that like you're passionate about or that interests you. And I think that will allow you to gain the knowledge. Like I get really excited about like researching, properties on AirDNA and short-term rental incomes and marketability of those properties. Like that got me really excited. So that's an area I went into. So yes, it's about the numbers. Yes, it's about like, ultimately like making profit and making money, but like find that like specific niche within real estate that like gets you excited because at the end of the day, in many cases, like I have a day job, right? I have children, I'm busy. So the last thing you want is like for your real estate to be like feel like a chore when you have to work on it. Find something like whether it's renovating, whether it's that multi-use home, maybe you're buying land, like whatever it is that like excites you and makes you passionate, like and do that.
What great piece of advice, because I think at the end of the day, we can get caught up in so many different ideas that are out there, right? But I think you're right. I think what speaks to you, what area of this investment, speaks to some of the things that you've probably been curious about, and pursue that, right? And hopefully, obviously the numbers will line up and make sense. Well, Justin, thank you again for your time. Thank you again for doing this. I deem it a privilege to be associated with you and serve you in this capacity, and I look forward to bumping into you again real soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leo. Thanks for taking some time.